I think we both are in alignment that we're here to grow. We're here to learn. We're here to be students of life. And so we don't want to get in the way of that for each other. And I think for those who aren't already in a committed relationship, to wait until you find someone.
Hey everyone, welcome to Conscious Conversations. I'm Nitin Garg, and I'm joined today by Nick Palladino King, as well as our guest, Kim Colella. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here with you.
Yeah, we're equally excited to have this deep conversation with you today. I want to just briefly introduce you and then hand it over to you, Kim, to guide our audience through a grounding. But first, just for the audience to get to know you a little bit, Kim is known as a spirit doula. Kim's goal is to help others birth their spirit more fully into the world. Kim she's co-authored several books as well as her own memoir, Lasting Gifts, Living with Intention, and also Dying in Peace. And her memoir is called Spirit Embraced, a guiding memoir for a life authentic and free, which won a 2019 Nautilus Award and a 2020 American Book Fest Award. So again, welcome, Kim, to the show. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. So I thought I'd just guide us through a moment of quiet and time to just really bring ourselves fully here. So I invite you to just take a moment to breathe in and out slowly, filling your belly first, and then your mid-stomach, and then your chest, and then releasing from your chest, then your mid-belly, then your belly. And just take a moment to take a few deep breaths. Now I invite you to imagine right below your navel that there's a cord, and just tune in to see how long it is. Often in the busyness of our days, it gets very, very short. So just observe that. And then take that cord all the way down into the floor, through the floor, down through all of the floors of your home, if you have a basement, through the basement. And then take that cord all the way down into the center of the earth and secure it there. And as you secure it, feel your spirit come more fully into your body and lock it in to your earth suit for this time together. And now imagine the green earth energy coming up through the center of your foot, up through your legs, through your thighs, your hips, and your pelvis, filling and nurturing you, nourishing you with earth's energy. And any excess energy that doesn't serve you, simply see it go down the grounding cord, any excess. And just keep that flowing up, and any excess that your body doesn't need going out. And then see the ball of golden light above you, of divine light. See it come down through your head, down your spine, mix with that green energy of the earth, and then come up your core and down your arms, out your hands, as well as up your head and returning. And as that golden light flows through you, mixing with that earth energy and flowing up and down, imagine it activating every cell of your being with light. Amplifying your true light, the light that you bring into this world, amplified and ready to participate in this conversation today and to receive whatever is gift for you, and to let anything that's not just go down that grounding cord. And bring yourself to this space, and we will begin.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
It's always interesting what comes up during these visualizations. And I noticed, for example, at first when I was trying to connect with this, beam of light / cord, at first I almost like was visualizing like something almost shooting out of the stomach. And then it was like, I was like, man, what am I imagining? And then there's like, almost like a tail maybe as you were taking us down towards the earth. But then it quickly became this cord, as we like anchored down into the earth and going deep. And I often wonder sometimes how much of this is imagination, how much of it is real. And there's certainly when you connect with these visualizations, you certainly feel such a grounding.
Yes.
There's certainly something happening.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that. I know you've done lots of work in this space. How much of it is just us imagining, and how much of it is how to make sense of it, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. So one of my gifts or curses, Nathan, is that I just trust it. I know that it works for me. I know that it makes me feel more embodied. And my experience with my clients, I was a massage therapist for 35 years. And I would say 98% of my clients, their spirit was kind of hanging up around here and in their head, because we're so intellectually focused as a culture. And then their neck muscles were super tight because it was closing off the information from the heart and the gut so that the head could rule, right? So my work is to help people bring all of that together in a marriage of the heart and the head rather than one over the other. And I know that when I put my grounding cord down, I feel like this empowerment. I feel like we're here on the earth to be incarnate beings, and the more we're embodied, then the more powerful we are, right? Yeah. So I feel more powerful and more strong when I take that cord down to the center of the earth and I secure it there. When I bring my soul, my spirit home to my body, instead of up here in worry or in trying to figure things out. I've just never been one to ask a lot of questions about it. I just play with it and I see how it feels.
Yeah.
If it feels right for me, I continue to do it. If it brings life for me, I continue to do it.
And, I think you're speaking to such a key point, which, I was pointing to the question, but now as we're talking, some of the clarity is coming in as well. It's almost like the work we are in right now, I feel that I see all around me, perhaps this generation, maybe multiple generations, is this aspect of we're taught so much about the mind and to be
Yeah.
analytical and be critical thinkers. And sort of like from birth, we're constantly taught to develop this intelligence, the intelligence up here.
Yes.
But hardly are we ever taught about the intelligence of the heart, the intelligence of the body and the gut. There's some books about it, but it's often it's very much just on the side. People feel a sense of love, so they know love exists. People know they make decisions from the gut when it's like, oh man, logically I should really be doing X, but that just doesn't feel right.
Right.
And it becomes strong enough and we have to pay attention to it. But I feel like multiple generations of work right now ahead of us is probably literally that, is how to help people recognize that, great, yes, there is an immense amount of intelligence up here, but there's also immense intelligence in the rest of the body.
Right. And when we're head focused, we're always trying to figure things out. What might happen, what did happen, right? Instead of being here
Yeah.
at this moment. And
Yeah, I was literally doing that, I guess.
and then learning how to quiet all those voices inside of us of the fears, the shoulds, but what if this, what if that? How do we go below those to hear the voice of our soul, the voice of our spirit? And my experience is that voice leads me to preposterous places that if I intellectualized it, I would never do. And it provides everything I need to do what seems unbelievable or impossible for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Kim, it sounds like I know Nitin introduced you as a spirit doula. Can we get some context on your work before we dive any deeper? I really want to shape where we're going. Can you talk about one? What is a spirit doula? What does a spirit doula do? And then also maybe can you talk about spirit? Give us some context for that, so then we kind of have some words for our listeners who are maybe a little less familiar with that experience and that connection.
So a spirit doula is a term I made up a decade and a half ago to describe what I was already doing, but I didn't have words to explain it. So when people would ask me, what do you do? I'd say, well, I do massage therapy. And that felt like taking a picture of my big toe and saying, this is who I am. It just didn't encompass. I had spent time, a good portion of my younger life being a birth doula. And then I started being at deaths and doing death doula work. And then clients were asking me to do spiritual coaching for them. And so things, just kind of morphed like this. And pretty soon the massage was the basis of my financial life. But there was so much more that I was doing outside that. And so for me, the term spirit doula is that my mission is to assist others in coming home to their body and to be their most authentic, true self in the world. Not who people are telling them they should be, but who they really are. Because I believe the world needs each of us to bring our true gifts into the world. And so that's my mission, is to help people stand more firmly in who they are without apology, and without having to push it on anybody either, and to just be at home with themselves.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. There's whenever we do these conscious conversations, I always try to watch the breadcrumbs or the connections, that come. And before we jumped on the show today, the Instagram post that I put out this morning was around following my heart. And
Oh,
I just think that it's so interesting. That's not something I've written in a while. And I felt called this morning to write a post about when I left my corporate career 15 years ago to follow my heart, to move to Thailand and to study yoga, and to really take a spiritual quest. And then you jump on the show 2 hours later, and this is exactly where your work is around listening to spirit and bringing it down into your body and understanding the differences. So I just think it's so cool that I put that out a couple hours ago. And for
I
you
did.
listening, this stuff is real. It happens. So Kim, you were talking about, bringing spirit down into body. A question that I really wanted to get into is, one, how do we start to listen to spirit? And then two, how do we know if it's spirit or ego? And I know those are two very different questions, but I'd like to kind of jump into those if those land with you.
So for me, I listen best to spirit in silence. And I think quiet and solitude is a lost art in our culture today. So taking time every day, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes, to stop and to breathe and to ask a question and listen, and to make spaciousness enough to receive the answer. So, and for me, it's learning to go deeper than these voices up here. And the way I know the difference between these voices of shoulds, fear, what ifs, is that the voice of my spirit is always a voice of love.
Mm.
And it will always call me to expand and not contract. So contraction could be being better than someone or something else, or having a clear, my perspective is the only perspective, right? Being expansive is making room to listen and believing everybody has a piece of the truth. And how do I listen and to respect that rather than to think I have my own? That would be ego. So that my bottom line is, does it call me to love? And does it expand me?
I like that. That's a very simple framework for something that can be quite complex.
Yeah.
Because I know sometimes people, feel like they get that sense of groundedness because not all of us can sit in, meditation and really even get our brains to quiet down to a place that we can find that spaciousness and expansiveness. So sometimes for folks, it's swimming, or
Right.
it's running, or it's going for a long walk. I know in my early journey, it was going on long walks. And even there, though, your brain is always competing because there's, I've now come to understand, okay, there's all these saboteur or the negative mindset voices. Our brains can literally be transformed to become wherever we direct our intention
Right.
and attention. So we can cultivate negative voices and negative mindsets just as much as we can cultivate positive voices and positive mindsets.
Yeah.
And I think I was just going to say, the way you put it in terms of, you at least, you have a sure way of knowing that when you're contacting spirit or that true essence within you, that you're going to feel those emotions of love and joy and expansiveness.
Right. And I might feel are you kidding me? Right. When we were preparing for my son to graduate from high school, we were touring colleges, and I was moving with the question, how am I going to fill the space that's freed when I'm no longer mom full time? Right? How am I going to fill that space so it doesn't just unconsciously get filled? But what do I want to fill it with? And then the voice, that deep voice inside, kept telling me, write. And I was like, I'm not a writer. Write. I don't have an English degree. Right. I just kept coming up with, and it stayed persistent and consistent. And that sometimes if it's a big thing, it will be consistent. So sometimes now I'll test something that comes up and say, okay, if I'm really supposed to do this, make sure it has the same oomph in 3 days, right? To just give me time to settle into,
Right.
does this have my name on it? So and so then I wrote Spirit Embraced, and actually my memoir is the first book that I wrote, because Lasting Gifts is more of a manual that I co-authored with somebody to get your end of life stuff in order as a gift to those you leave behind. So that whole thing of it just seemed like such a preposterous message to come up to write. And yet it's exactly what I was supposed to be doing and what I'm continued to call to do in this last third of my life.
I have this urge to want to get to know your story even more deeply. I want to actually ask you what are some events, or what was a key event that really shaped your life, that really brought this perspective wholly into you?
Well, I would say there were 3. The first one was when I was about 8 years old, and I lived in a very chaotic household. My dad was in late stage alcoholism at that point, and he was living on the streets. My mom was a single mom of 8 children, and I was the 7th. So you can imagine there was a lot going on. And after a particularly difficult day, I woke up that night in bed, and I felt this presence of deep love and care around me and through me. And I knew in that moment I could create something different for myself. And I made a commitment to love that night. That energy just felt like the deepest love I'd ever felt, and I made a commitment to follow that energy and to learn to love and be loved, which I think learning to be loved is one of the most courageous things we can do. I didn't understand that part of it until much later. And then when I was in my 20s, I was at a workshop for adult children of alcoholics in my early 20s. And one of the speakers said, your unresolved issues with your father will become your issues with your husband or son, and your unresolved issues with your mother will become your issues with your wife or daughter. And I, had known for, well over a decade at that point that I was committed and determined to create something new. So I knew I needed to deal with those issues so that I could create the kind of family that I dreamed of. And then the third thing was when I turned 30, I went to Calcutta to meet Mother Teresa and to experience her work, which had been a dream of mine since I was a little girl. She was somebody I really respected and admired and wanted to be like. And again, I got the message it was time to go. And I made a commitment that I needed to have $1,400 by the end of August, and circled it in my work calendar and blessed it. And then went to work trying to get all my bills paid off so I could take 3 months off and go off on my own. And the night before the end of August, I had less than $200 in my accounts. I had all my bills paid off, but I didn't have the 14. I only had 200. And as I was driving home across this beautiful bridge, I thought to myself, I'm not meant to go. And I heard that voice say, just wait. And the next day I went to work, and my business partner went to her P.O. box, and there was a check there from an insurance company for me. And I went to meet my P.O. box, and there was a check there from an insurance company. And then late in the day, this man came in that I didn't know and bought 10 gift certificates from me, which had never happened before and never happened again. And nobody knew I had this goal outside of, my most precious friends. And so at the end of the day, I was 82 cents short of my $1,400 goal. And I had $1 in my pocket, and I took it out and I slammed it on the desk and started jumping up and down saying, I'm going. And my associate Katie said, you're going where? I'm going to Calcutta to meet Mother Teresa. And bought my airline ticket and left. And that experience, every step of the way, that's just one piece of a long story. Every step of the way, everything I needed was provided for me. Everything. So after that, I never doubted that voice. I was fully committed.
That's such a cool story, Kim, and it's bringing up thoughts in myself and my own life and journey that are just resonating, and I'm sure there's other people listening too that have had those moments of, this isn't real. Like, how is this happening? Is this happening? And again, maybe I'm going to keep harping this on this episode. This stuff is real. This stuff does happen. Kim's not making this up. I've had my experiences. Nathan has too. A question I wrote down, Kim, before we started was, how do we learn to trust spirit? And I've struggled with that before too. Of you get a hit, you get an insight, and then the ego, the fears, the doubts say, don't do it. So how have you learned to lean into it and to trust it before you had data? Because now you have a relationship with it. So for those listening that don't have one yet, how do they develop that?
Well, even with it, right? I negotiate with spirit. I remember when I met my husband, I was 33. And I had decided I was ready to get married. I was ready to meet somebody. I'd had many relationships, had never been married, dated men I knew I would never marry, and stayed in those relationships too long. And I got to a point where I was like, I'm done. I'm ready to find somebody. And I sat down and I wrote the qualities I wanted in a partner in my journal. And 3 months later, I met my husband. And I knew quite quickly, this is the person I'm supposed to be journeying with. He did not know that. He took things very slowly, right? And so, we met, we danced. I told him I'd like to finish the conversation at the end of the night. He was a little taken aback at how forward I was. He went and sat down and gave me to write out his phone number. We ended up getting together 3 days later. We went out on 2 or 3 dates, and then he made it clear he would come to where I lived. He lived in Seattle. I lived in Tacoma. He would come down. And I waited 3 months for him to make that move, right? And I really questioned spirit during that time. Like, if this guy I need a sign. I need him to do something. And when we ask for something, I think we need to be a little more clear, because I was in graduate program up in Seattle, and one of his coworkers was in it, and he just wrote a little note through her to me, and I was like, are we in 6th grade? Like, what is this? But it was something, so I stayed in, and once I'm a diver, and he goes in slowly, but once he's in, he's fully in, and I dive, and then I think, what was I thinking when I'm already far in it? So I don't say that with any kind of negativity towards him. We just do things differently. But that experience of feeling like this is the person. And let me tell you, I just told him the other day, we've been married, it'll be 29 years in July. And I told him the greatest accomplishment of my life was marrying him. And really that he rewrote the script so fully, and watching him be the kind of father he is to our son brings me to tears often. And they're tears of joy, like awe of just seeing their love between each other, and how grateful I am that I shifted that paradigm I came from of shame and fear to this good life. That's not perfect, right? It has hardships like any marriage or any family life, but it is really sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question, but for me to stick with these things Spirit asks of me, I often ask for a sign. And I often will, when I am in doubt, I'll ask for a sign, or I'll go for a walk in frustration and ask whether, did I make a mistake here? And generally what I hear is, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. Stick with it.
So it sounds like when we ask a question, to get clear on what it is that we're asking for, and then two, you didn't say this, but have some patience is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Have some patience for sure. And then to stay open and non-judgmental in what the signs are. It sounded like, for example, like, oh, that sign's not big enough. Well, you asked for a sign. You didn't define it. So it sounds like those are all some frameworks to kind of summarize what it is that you did cover through that story.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah. And to share, around 31, 32 for myself, I had a similar experience where I had been dating lots of women. Things weren't working out. I was getting frustrated. And in a meditation, in a yoga nidra session, I said to myself, and this was spirit, this wasn't how I talked at the time, 8-9 years ago, I said, I want love. And I noticed I didn't say I want a partner. I didn't say I wanted a girlfriend. I didn't say I wanted a wife. I said I wanted love. And 2 weeks later, my now wife walked by me, and she is one of the most loving people that I've ever met, and has taught me how to accept love. I could do it on the other way before. So I had a similar experience with that, Kim, of that wasn't my voice. That came from some other place or space and came through me. And luckily I had done enough work at that time to hear it and trust it. But I was like, that's interesting. I want love, not a partner, not a girlfriend. I want something different. So it's, I had a similar experience with finding my wife.
Yeah, same here actually.
Really?
I think that was my actually first. Well, it was definitely one major event in which I think I almost call it my turning towards God moment. In fact, I was recording a video yesterday and talking about it as well, where basically, I had my heart broken as a teenager, as a guy in college, even afterwards, more times than I can count. It was just painful, just simply painful. And I realized, part of it was maybe a thought process born out of pain, wanting to change that. So finally going, okay, I don't want this anymore. I want this part of my life to be better. And I realized soon afterwards, as I started looking and, reading and researching and seeking out resources, one, I just became open to learning, figuring out what was going wrong. But even then, when I figured that out, similar to you, Nick, I was meeting women and dating, but I, hadn't met the person I really wanted to be with. And there was, I think another realization of, similar to, I think what you said, for me, it was, I want to be with a lifelong partner. I want to find my lifelong partner. I'm done with the dates. And a friend of mine handed me this book, Power of Your Subconscious Mind. And I remember reading the chapter around attracting your ideal partner. And it was similarly, defining the ideal mate, someone you want to be in divine union with, someone who's going to fulfill you as much as you're going to fulfill their path in life. So there's a match in terms of supporting each other's life growth. And I started reciting that day and night. I even had a song associated with it. And all this 10 plus years of agony, and even later not finding the right person and being frustrated, I started doing this. In 6 months, I met my wife. A year later, we got married. And I was like, holy cow, how did this just flip on his head this fast when it was so painful for so long? And at first, when my friend gave me that book, I was like, are you smoking something? You're saying I'm just going to think stuff and it's just going to happen. I mean, I've been thinking stuff and it hasn't happened, right? But oftentimes
what you were thinking was happening. I would argue.
Well, I was afraid. I think it was the fear-based thinking, right? Yep. So I was afraid of that. Every time I was going to meet a person, it wasn't going to work out. So that was the story that was playing. And so, of course, you know, a whole bunch of things shifted there, and I was like, whoa. And so now I've come to know that, you know, think carefully.
Think carefully, but one of the things that I think you said that was most important is that you recognized you wanted a partner who you would both support each other's growth. Maybe you said soul's growth, but
Yeah.
you would be committed to each other's. And I think when we get it's almost like we're looking for a unicorn at that point, but that unicorn's looking for us too, right? There's not a lot of people who are looking that deeply. I think they want that, but they're not that clear. And when my husband and I,
Even that language was not available to me, actually. So it got introduced to me as a means through the book, you
okay,
know, and I'm sure there's you know, the book had this very specific language around, I invite love, joy, happiness, and you know, all of this language around someone that meant to be in divine communion with, and you know,
yeah,
all this deep language. I often do wonder what sparked that book coming into my life. And I think it was just that I started asking, I started saying, I want love, I want someone who you know, who will be my lifelong partner in this journey.
yeah. And you were so ready at that point to find somebody who could support you and you could support them. And I think that is the most beautiful vision of divine union, where we are for each other's soul's growth, not wanting the other to just be our illusion of what we want, but really we want a partner who can support our soul and who we see their light, they're living their light, and we can support that growth for them as well. So when my husband and I got married, you know, our vows included the typical till death do us part. But we had sat down and talked about that beforehand, and we were both very clear with each other that our primary responsibility was to our own soul, and that if in our marriage our soul started to die, that would be a death that would cause our marriage to end. That my responsibility was to my soul and as partner to his. And I really feel like that's what's kept our marriage strong and alive for almost 30 years, is because we have been faithful to supporting each other's soul work. Even when it feels preposterous, right? Our son was just 2004, he was just 6 years old. I had this experience where I met a woman who takes in a airport in Chicago, and she takes women to South Africa at that time to immerse them in the AIDS pandemic. And I found my mouth saying, well, I could find 10 women to go on that. And my brain was saying, what are you talking about? You have a 6-year-old son. You can't go to Africa for, 16 days. Where's the money for this going to, all these things. But my mouth kept talking. And so I was kind of like watching this whole thing. And, when I came home and told my husband, he was like, are you going? We'll make it work. And, he trusted that, even though it seemed like the most preposterous thing I could come home saying I wanted to do. And I did. And I didn't bring 10 women, but there were 6 of us who went together, friends from all over the United States, and spent those 16 days that were life-changing for all of us.
Kim, are you a Gemini by any chance?
I'm not, but I sure sound like it, don't I?
Because I'm like, you and I are wired really similar. I'm hearing myself talk here. Like, hey, hey, tell my wife, hey, Emily, I've decided I'm gonna go to Peru for 2 weeks and live with a shaman. And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I just got to do it. This is, this is happening. And that's a serious story. But what I want to throw in here too, and Kim, it sounds like you have this as well. And what you just said about not allowing your soul to die, in relationship is so powerful. And something I've worked with myself and my wife and also with other clients. And I don't know if you guys have seen this. There tends to be, in general, I've noticed there tends to be one partner that is doing spiritual work and then one partner that is not. That at least has been the type of students and clients that have come to me. And the question I've gotten a lot is, how do you balance that? Or how is that okay? Or like my wife isn't into yoga or meditation. And my answer has always been, as long as you support your partner on going on their path, then that's how you make it work. Now, if they start getting in the way of that, or they start preventing you from going down your path or your life's calling, that's when you can say, hey, time out, this isn't working. But you don't have to be into the same things for your souls to flourish. But I
Right.
do think you need to support each other in that, even if it makes you uncomfortable as the partner. Like, my wife doesn't want me to do that, but she knows I need to do that with a capital N, from spirit. So that then she will support it. Doesn't mean she will like it. And for me, that is very rare to find in relationship. Thoughts on that, Kim, on the dynamic there between partners and spirit?
Yeah, I just, one of the things of growing up in a really large tribe of family is that they have been my teachers, right? And I've seen different friends or family members who get in a relationship and you see them become smaller and smaller, and you can see less and less of them dying through. And so that's why my commitment to myself was so deep. And my husband's name is Nico, and he is on a spiritual path. He is a hospice chaplain, and he is a really amazing being. So we both were on a spiritual path. What we're looking at on the spiritual path isn't always the same thing, but we both are really committed to each other's growth, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, intellectually. But that's what I think we both are in alignment, that we're here to grow. We're here to learn. We're here to be students of life. And so we don't want to get in the way of that for each other. And I think for those who aren't already in a committed relationship, to wait until you find someone who can do that. If you're in a relationship, you both have different interests and one's not on a spiritual journey, then you begin to, like I think, Nick, you said your wife is the most loving person you've ever met. Mm-hmm. Right? So I think she is on a spiritual journey, just a very different one, right? She's following love and she's growing in love all the time. So as long as our partners are doing things we respect and that we respect, I think that's
well said.
Yeah, a good reflection that her spiritual lens looks very different than mine, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't have one. That's a really good reflection.
Or that she might not even call it that.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Right.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nick, we got some similarity in that way as well, because similar here, my wife isn't one to sit on a meditation cushion and meditate, but the way she tunes in with her work and the level of dedication she brings to her work, and it's like her spiritual practice, and she's often talked about it, and it's something that I'm trying to learn and embody more. For her, it's very much the karma yoga path, and doing good deeds and being loving and kind. So yeah, it's a different way in.
Yeah. And our partners are our greatest teachers, our partners and our children, right? And so in my own practice, to honor them as that and to keep that in the forefront. One of my favorite teachers over the years is a man named David Spangler. And In class one day, somebody brought up soulmates, and he said, well, if there is such a thing as a soulmate, your soulmate will take you to your very edges because they're there for your soul's growth, right? And that was so helpful for me at that point. I'd only been married a couple years, and because I'd married such a safe man, all the old residual pain had come to the surface. And I kept thinking, this is so hard. This is so hard. Did I make a mistake? And then when David said that, I knew, oh no, he's just by being who he is, he's challenging me to grow. And that's a good thing, right? So yeah.
What's the edge that you're working with today? Curious.
The edge I'm working with today, well, I'm always working with the edge of, the big ones, continuing to learn to love more fully and to receive love more joyfully. And for me, when I first got married, it was very terrifying to walk into a house where somebody was beaming love at me, right? Because I was used to walking into the house and having to figure out immediately whether I was safe or not. Mm-hmm. Right? So it was a big shift. So continuing to grow in my ability to love. But I feel a calling right now. I was in a class with my mentor, Jean Houston. And in the class, I got this message that I was called to be a soul scribe. And I said, okay. I have no idea what that means, but I'm in. And so I'm working with that, doing step by step what I hear I'm called to do, and then letting it unfold of what that means. So that is an edge I'm working on right now, of growing into that. I've just retired from doing massage after 35 years because of 2 major injuries, and not associated with massage, but outside of that. And so my edge has been to see the injuries as my teachers. I feel like I'm in a doctoral program now that my whole life I've been devoted to learning to listen to the body in my body. And now I'm in a doctoral program for that and taking it to a whole new level because my body's very clear when I need to stop. And if I try to negotiate, I will pay for that. So just learning to really honor what I need for my own vitality and health, and not to hold on tightly to who I was 4 years ago and what I was able to do 4 years ago, but what I'm able to do now, and what a gift it is that I'm still here and I'm upright, and to keep that at the forefront, even on days that are painful.
Yeah. You said soul scribe, and I know you said you're still figuring out what that means, but what meaning have you been able to make? I'm just curious, haven't heard that term before.
Yeah, I hadn't either. So when I got the message, I was like, okay. And then in the next class, I got the message that I was to transcribe all the letters that I started writing to my son when he was in utero, and continued to write to him through much of his life in a journal, and to transcribe those for him. And then I believe there'll be a parenting book that comes out of that. But part of it now too is we've had, since July of 2020, we have lost 24 of our beloveds between my husband's family, my family, and friends.
Yeah.
And it gets confusing. We have an altar and we pray that we keep pictures or whatever, but sometimes it gets confusing. And so my work, every week right now, I'm doing a collage, an 8.5 by 11 collage for each person of pictures I have. I'm a photographer, so I have many pictures of many of them. So I put those on with their birth date, their death date, and just a few descriptors for each for them, and creating a book of the dead for our home of our beloveds so that we will have that. And it just feels super important.
Yeah.
And I'm loving doing it because it gives me time to, many of them didn't have services of any sort. Some died during COVID. And so it gives me time to have my own ritual around their leaving. And then some now are starting to be part of my soul team. And that has been really fun and exciting to shift the relationship with them, even though they're not in physical form.
I remember there's something in the book you call the Soul Council.
Yeah.
And so can you tell us a little bit about that? Is that what you're referring to here?
Yes. So my soul council are beings who are no longer on the planet, who I deeply respect and love, who showed up. I had heard of this concept, I think, in a class with Jean. And so one day I had some big questions I needed to ask and needed assistance with. So I intuitively put out 7 chairs, and then I sat down with my journal and I wrote my question, and then I listened to what each person who had shown up. So Jesus had shown up for me, and Mother Teresa had shown up, and Sigmund, Alethea, speaker of truth. Princess Diana showed up, and I was like, Princess Diana, I respect you, but I don't have any deep connection to you. What are you here for? And she told me she was there to remind me of my softness. And so when I have big questions, Mary Magdalene was there, Mother Mary. So when I have big questions, I will sit down and I will ask them. And then I'll just, is it my imagination or am I really hearing them? It doesn't matter to me. I know I get clarity, right? For my next steps. So
And I know that, when we learn to create that space of deep calm,
yeah,
and invite a part of ourselves or another being into that space, something certainly magical happens. As long as we can still keep our mind, because it wants to jump in and be like, what are you imagining here? What do you think you're doing? And so it's an interesting, at least at the stage at where I am, it's an interesting dynamic.
one of my friends just died 3 weeks ago. She was a healer, a Reiki master in the Asui system, and a really unique human being. She died at 78. And I had deep grief about her leaving, mostly because she was alone. And none of her beloveds were nearby to support her in that transition. I just had a lot of things come up. And then that lasted for about 4 or 5 days. And then I heard, well, she can be part of your soul council. And I was like, oh, awesome. And invited her in. And then like 3 days later, I was doing an energy healing on a client, and she showed up and was telling me, nope, you need to do Reiki on her head. And it was this incredible experience of working with her, with my client. And my client had a really awesome experience, not knowing what I was experiencing, right? So
Yeah.
I just go with all of that as long as it's taking me to a place that's expansive and loving.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a cool share, and I've never put language to it, but I guess I have an inner counsel that I've developed, and you've kind of touched on it. But is my head, my heart, and my guts, but they each have a different voice, and they each have a different kind of character. So
Oh,
the one in my mind is more of like the wise sage. The one in my heart is actually a woman, and then the one in my gut is more of like a warrior spirit. So I'll actually, I don't know if I've ever shared this out loud before. I'll actually have all 3 of them discuss when I have big decisions to go through, and I'll ask each of them what they think. And what's interesting is they all have a different opinion, And then what I'll try to do is allow the three of them to talk and come up with a decision. So I'm making a holistic decision from head, heart, and guts. And the three of those together, like, they have different opinions, they have different takes, they have different personalities. And I try to maybe get 2 out of 3 online if I can do that. And that seems to work for me, but that's something that's intuitively come through me for the years. But I like that the inner counsel, I'm going to steal that and
Yeah.
use that.
And isn't it amazing how different their voices are?
Yeah,
Like,
very different. Very different.
I'll write what I hear them saying, and Alethea, speaker of truth, will be like, listen, girl. She just, she just puts it right out there. Of course you need to do this, where, yeah, they each have their own kind of tone and language. And I just find it super fun.
Mm-hmm. I'm even noticing that within my chakras, there's different personalities and voices and opinions, which I've actually just started to uncover. That's a whole nother topic, but that I've been picking up on that lately too, which has been really interesting.
Yeah. And that makes me, when you were saying you have 3, I was like, well, I have 7.
Mm-hmm.
They're connected to each chakra if
Mm-hmm.
I looked at them in that way. Right?
I think so. Yep.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. Some fun homework to explore.
Some chakra meditation to activate them first, and then
Yeah. For me, the spiritual life, I think it's really important that we see it as playful. That so often spiritual work, or it's so heavy, right? You gotta do this or that. But I think it's really important to have it be playful and to trust when I hear that I'm supposed to do something and I say yes, then it's kind of like I'm playing hide and seek. Like, okay, where's this resource I need to do this going to come from? But not with, oh, where's that going to come from? But with, where's that going to come from? Right? With this excitement and playfulness and delight.
Yeah, that gets so lost in the spiritual path, and maybe to some extent it's because at first it can be really hard when these questions come and you start to do things differently. But at some point, I mean, I found that it gets easier and enjoyable, which takes time. It took maybe 10 years for me to start to touch those places and spaces, and then to go, oh yeah, this is fun. And I dropped using the word practice maybe a year ago. So like, I no longer say I practice yoga or I practice meditation, because for me, then that implies that I'm not in those things. And that they are separate from me and they're outside of me. So it's like, oh, no, the 3 of us are in yoga, or the 3 of us are in meditation, or we're in present moment. And that's helped me have a lot more joy and fun on this path, even when things are really challenging and suck, to be like, oh, no, this is exactly what's supposed to be showing up. And wow, okay, where can I find the fun and joy even in the discomfort? And that's helped me tremendously with that sense of play and joy and fun within the spiritual practice and in the physical ones.
And isn't it much like our relationships, right? At first, you're kind of checking things out. And then the more comfortable you get and the more you learn to trust that person, the more silly you can be, the more playful you can be.
I'm even thinking of, like, we say we got to work in relationship. It's like, well, at some point, maybe no, maybe we need to play in relationship rather than work in it. Not that the work isn't important, but that gets, or get what?
Or surrender into relationship.
Yeah, initially it feels like, the journey starts from like often a place of pain, at least when I witness when someone goes to a practice like meditation or starts to take up yoga, it's like, oh my God, like life is just, there's a weight. And so in order to lift the weight, they're starting to connect with these different practices to try to like bring some sort of balance into their lives. And then when they realize it works, it's like, okay, now I'm dedicated. I've got to do this with like discipline, because otherwise I get thrown off the bus and things go haywire. And so it starts to bring in that seriousness. But yeah, to your point, Nick, as we continue the practice and that sage positive mindset strengthens, it becomes more natural. It actually becomes a place of comfort and ease and flow, love, joy. You start to realize, in fact, one of the things that happens to me these days is, I used to be that I would catch my behavior or something I said afterwards, And now it's like in the moment that it's occurring, where I see, you know, some sort of a reaction, an emotion, you know, or ego with fear, some kind of a grasping or attachment starting to come up. Now I start to realize those in the moment. And there's like, the moment I see it, it's like, oh, there's a softening. Okay, here we go again. Don't need to go down that path. Let's switch. So it's like the on the cushion practice has made off the cushion life easier to flow with. Versus before, it was life was so painful in so many ways, and there was so much, oh my god, striving and, you know, living under the pressure of corporate deadlines and work and all the pressures we put on ourselves, sometimes needlessly, that brought us to try to find a place for space and peace and reflection. So it's interesting, just like how the wave flows up and down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kim, I know you mentioned something really, I love, I don't know if practice is the right word, but this commemoration, or, you know, consciously creating a memory of a loved one that has passed away, and creating space for, you know, really, really honoring that. Can you say a little bit more about that, how that sort of came about, and how it supports you in that journey? I mean, you said there's 24 loved ones that have passed away in, you know, either that you or your husband knew in the last 4 years or so.
Yeah.
And that's got to be, you know, a place of deep grief and emotions. So I'm curious, how has that been helping you? And is there a message there you want to share with others?
Well, I would say because we've lost so many, for me, it's been like riding a tsunami wave and just not looking down into the water, but to keep my eyes focused on the present, and I'm riding the wave, and then another one comes and I have to shift my balance to stay upright, right? And that's what the last 4 years have felt like, because so much has changed and so many people have passed. I think the fact that my husband and I have walked with death in very intimate ways, the grief is different. Some of the people I was able to be with when they died, some of the people I wasn't, but I was able to. I really believe that when somebody dies, that they're going to someplace so beyond what I can imagine here. And so I never feel grief for them. I feel grief that I don't have them on this plane. So there's grief, but it generally my grief doesn't take me down in the way, say, in 2005, both my mother and the man who was like a surrogate father for me died within a couple months. And it took a year for me to grieve that, because I felt like every cell of my body had to do an adjustment, because now I was the elder. I didn't have a safety net any longer. My safety net was gone. And that I was called to be the safety net for others and to be an elder in my community. And so that was a big adjustment. But now I've made that transition. And so it's not as difficult when people do die. But this process of making this little memory sheet for each of them, and it usually takes me a full day to do one. It's so sweet to just be in quiet and be looking at these pictures I have of their life and choosing which ones I want to represent them in this book. It's just such a deep honoring, and my husband and friends are getting so much delight out of it when they see it, that is touching something in them, that's what keeps me moving forward with it, is just how it gives me that space to bring completion to that relationship in the physical form.
Yeah, that's so heartfelt. And, I feel this like compassion that's pouring out in memory, right, of a loved one. And I often think of family members and friends, and recognize that this journey, at least on this plane on earth in this life, it's temporary.
Right.
And even, of course, my friendship with Nick, and how it started off from doing yoga teacher training with him, and to today, that these relationships and friendships are so precious that sometimes we forget and we take for granted that life is forever. At least we start to live that way,
Right.
until something happens, and then we get this deep remembrance. I once remember going through a practice called the 5 Buddhist Remembrances. And one of the, you do this sort of chant, and we did this in a class, 30 people facing each other, chanting a particular remembrance for a few minutes, and just the amount of tears that pour out of people when they recognize that, yeah, ultimately all things, all relationships, we will have to leave those behind.
Yeah.
But in doing so, what I noticed was, at first I thought, man, we're going through such a deep exercise, and we're saying these things like I'm going to lose all my relationships and all my all my objects, all my possessions, all my relationships and all my possessions.
Yeah.
And you say this over and over. What I realized in the moment, it became so deep, and there was this deep grief in the room and tears flowing down. And then as we processed that, and as we breathed, and as we stepped out of the room, our instructors told us to then go for a solo walk for 10 minutes outside once we were done with the practice. We stepped outside, and it was as if we were looking at a new world altogether. Yes. Our sense of awareness and appreciation for the flowers, the wind, every little thing that was happening in life was so heightened. It's as if we died in that moment, but then we're reborn.
Yes. And that, I became acquainted with death as my companion when I was only 14. My dad died unexpectedly. He had been part of my life again for 5 years before he died. He was sober. And I got pulled out of class. I was in the 9th grade, freshman in high school. I was taking a final, and they came and pulled me out of class. And I was like, what could be so important that I can't finish my final, right? And my brother-in-law was waiting to tell me my dad had died. And then just a year and a half later, when I was a junior in high school, my mother had a massive stroke, and they told us she wouldn't live 5 years. If she survived the stroke, she wouldn't live 5 years. She ended up living 35 or 30 more years. But because I was told that at 15 and a half or 16, whatever, I lived my whole life from that moment on making choices, knowing Mom might be gone. I wanted to go study in Madrid for a semester. Well, Mom could die while I was gone. Okay, so how do you say goodbye in a way you're complete? When I went to Calcutta, Mom could be gone when I come home, right? It didn't stop me from doing things, but it encouraged me to make sure I left with nothing unsaid or done. And I'm grateful for that, because it's given a sweetness to my life, knowing that death is my companion, and that in a blink of an eye, this could all be gone. For me or for one of my beloveds, that I won't have them there. So I can't, my husband knows that I need him to look me in the eye before he leaves. That we have to make eye contact tell each other to have a great day, sometimes do a blessing over each other before he goes out the door. And my son knows that I need, to say I love you and to look at him in the eye and to absorb him, especially, he lives in the Midwest now. So when he comes home and hangs out with us for a couple weeks the night before, I have this anticipatory grief that this could be the last time I'm with him ever, right? Not just as he goes off, but, and I want to snuggle a little more, and I want to, spend more time with him the day before he leaves. So I just love living life in a way that I know that this moment is pure gift. And when things are really good in our lives, I feel a deep responsibility to enjoy it. Because it can all change like that. So when you're having a moment where the sun's shining and you're smelling the flowers, really take it in, because in a moment that could change.
Yeah, it reminds me of the saying that this too shall pass.
Yes.
And for me, it's always a remembrance of no matter how terrible something is, this too shall pass, and to not worry too much about it. And also how amazing something is, that this too shall pass, and not to get too attached to it. And then to use that as a tool to stay present and grateful for the present moment. And with that, so shall this podcast episode. This too shall pass.
I think we can find I don't think we can find a better moment than that to probably wrap up this conversation.
That's great. Kim, any last words of wisdom or advice for us or for our listeners before we sign off?
Just thank you. Thank you for this time, for your presence, for the work you two are doing in the world, for having such a high quality podcast that is speaking to some really important things.
Thank you.
I'm very grateful. And to your listeners, thanks for listening.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Kim,
I just felt that just landed on me big time.
Yeah. Thank you. Kim, if any of our listeners here, want to get in touch with you, of course, we'll have some links to your site in the podcast description. But is there anything you have going on that you would like our listeners to know about, an event, training, or a book?
Nothing right now that is going on. Of course, if they want to hear more, to get Spirit Embrace, they can get it at their local stores or at Amazon. And please, if you have any comments or questions, contact me through my website, which is Spirit Doula. Doula is doula.com, so spiritdoula.com. And I'd love to hear from them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kim. It was so wonderful having you in this conversation today. And we definitely touched the spirit. I think the spirit of this conversation shall live on and hopefully touch many others in awakening their own relationship with spirit.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Blessings.